Lloyd asking a question of the students here. Lloyd asked them, how does he get a haircut like that? My response would have been, you've got to get some hair first.
They weren't as rude as that.
Gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome Mel Cater today, Principal of Mentone Grammar, and 4 of his Year 10 students. I had the privilege last evening of being at a valedictory dinner at Mentone Grammar, where there were 320, I think, people in attendance for the Year 12 valedictorians. A wonderful ceremony in St Kilda, and I know the school will be looking for a larger venue next year. The school has, well, next year it will reach over 2,000 students now. When I started with Mentone Grammar as chair of the board, we had 800 boys, and we had to do something about that because we couldn't afford to have the infrastructures necessary for the future unless we got more students and more money. And the demographic surveys showed that we couldn't, the local community would not be able to afford a high fee paying single-sex school. So we had to go co-ed. There's another story associated with that which I won't bore you with, but it's been a tremendous success, and I congratulate and have worked very closely with Mal Cater in his deliberations. There's a wonderful phrase that says it takes a village to raise a child, and Mentone Grammar is a village. It's a single campus school with roughly 2,000 students, where people know each other and know each other pretty well, which is very, very endearing to the future of the school. So welcome, Mel, over to you. I have no idea what's going to happen here today, but we're in very safe hands. Thank you. Good luck, Mel.
Famous last words there from Simon about we're in good hands. I want to contextualise first of all, but let me start by saying thank you for inviting us down today to address you. I'll try and use principal voice, but I don't usually use microphones, so I'll try and project my voice so that you can hear. We actually had 700 people at the dinner last night for valedictory. I am a little bit husky as a result because we spent a lot of last night sharing lots of lovely memories of young people's journeys through the school. I brought 4 male students today, and I've done that for a very deliberate reason. They are currently called my superheroes, and I'm really proud to bring them down here today as a little bit of reward for an action they took last week. They actually intervened in a robbery taking place at the Mentone News Agency, and because of their actions, a pretty nasty situation was averted. I won't go into the specific details, but I am really proud. They were just waiting for a bus, they saw something happening, and they decided to actually take an action to help the shopkeeper with this robbery that was in the midst of happening. And having seen the videos of their involvement, because generationally they film everything, don't you worry about that. But not only was I proud of their actions with that part of the story, but they then, without any prompt, went back the next day to check on the well-being of the shopkeeper. And I think that says a lot about their young people. So hence their reward is come down with the principal and share some stories about their educational journey. So we're going to team this up a little bit. At the end of the presentation, we're actually going to try and involve all of you in an activity. So we're just going to see how that goes. It does involve your mobile phones, because part of my mission here today is to say that is not evil amongst young people. So we'll see how we go on that mission. But let's start by having a look at what is, and I'm talking about the Mentone Grammar context, obviously. It's what I'm very familiar with. So we're a school that has students from 3-year-old kinder to Year 12. We offer both VCE mainstream programs and vocational training programs, which are called VCAL programs. So students who are more looking at going into the trades will do a VCAL program at Year 12, and it's been one of the benefits of the school growing that we can offer a broader range of pathways for them beyond the school. We have been a co-educational school since 2006. Many of you who have lived in this area for a long time will remember that massive decision, and I credit Simon with an enormous amount of work in making sure that that was successful. I became the principal in 2007, and it's fair to say, Simon, we had a bit of a mess to clean up, didn't we? And we got on with doing that, and the school's thrived basically ever since. And that's evidenced, as Simon said, in the numbers at the school at the moment. So we have 1,880 students, boys and girls at the school, 250 staff, and when as Simon said, when we went co-ed, we had 800 boys. In the first year of co-ed, we still had 800 students because we lost 110 and we gained 110. We certainly had a lot less staff in those days too. So it's quite a complex organisation in its structure, and that's a lot of people on site each day. We offer what's called a together apart together model, and one of the boys is going to explain that. Holly, is that you? Yep, come on forward.
So the together apart together structure was introduced in 2006 when the females obviously came into the school.
You either speak the mic loudly or use the microphone.
Just a second we go.
Is that a bit better?
It's fairly close.
Yeah. Okay, so the together apart together structure was introduced in 2006, and in that time was the early learning centre, which is the 3-year-old kinder till year 4 about. So when in the younger years, the boys and girls are together, so they do all their learning, all their classes in the same room, in the same groups. And then from years 5 to 9, which is known as the stages of maturity, where everybody starts to develop things get a bit different, and it's done in that way to help people feel comfortable in their environments. And then in the older years, from years 9 to 12, then the classes come back together for their final years of their schooling. So that's the way it's been.
Thanks, Ollie. Good man.
Thank you.
Well done. Good.
So it's the together apart together model is designed around maturation, and if any of you have grandchildren who are around that year 5 to year 9 type age groups, there's a great difference between a young boy and a young girl at that stage, and we need to accommodate that as best we can. And so this model, as Ollie has outlined there, does accommodate boys and girls, totally socially integrated on the site, but in separate classes for their learning. And in the market research that we do, that is the number one reason the school's grown as it has. The right model of co-education in place. We offer a very broad-based program, and again from our market research we know that one of the drivers of success for us is there's something at Mentone Grammar that everyone can excel at. That's a huge undertaking, but it's really part of my educational philosophy that there needs to be something that each student can adapt as their area of expertise, their area of specialisation, and it might be sport, it might be drama, it might be dance, it might be a whole multitude of things, and we try and provide that broad-based program, and that's a massive undertaking. So a small number of girls came to me a couple of years ago wanting us to have an equestrian team, and I said to them, let me be clear, we're not buying horses, we're not buying land, we're not buying trailers, we're not buying this, that and the other. So they said, sir, all we're looking for are saddlecloths and a t-shirt to wear when we compete for the school. Tick, we all of a sudden had an equestrian team. So we encourage the students to be empowered to come forward with their interests, and that's very much driven the growth in that broad-based program. We have what's called a strong learning enhancement program for those students who are struggling with their learning to try and help them get to a higher level of achievement. But we also have some very elite learners within the school, and they get what's called learning enrichment. It used to be called gifted and talented, bit of a brand with that. So we call it learning enhancement to take them to a higher level learning enrichment. So all students are catered for within the school structure. What you'll see as we go through this presentation is we're not about generic education for one size fits all. we're trying to design a system, and you'll see that as I go through the presentation with the guys, that accommodates their individual needs. And when you've got, as Simon said, close to 2,000 students next year, that's a huge undertaking. But there's ways you can actually accommodate that, as you'll see. We are Mentone Grammar in Mentone, and part of our marketing is that's where we are. We are not a multi-campus school. We have no intention during my time, and that will finish at the end of next year. But strategically, we've always said we're Mentone Grammar in Mentone. We're here to serve this local community, which is another one of the reasons it's lovely to be here today, because our enrolment catchment takes us up to Elwood, out to Oakley, and down to Seaford. It used to be Beaumaris. We really relied way too heavily on Beaumaris over a long period of time. Beaumaris, Parkdale, Mentone was the catchment. 85% of our enrolment for a very long time came from within 5 kilometres. And you can't run a business that's that dependent on a small catchment. Half of our catchment, of course, is the Bay. And so we had no chance that way, but we had a lot of chances, and I'll tell you some funny stories hopefully amongst it. We managed to recruit a hairdresser in Elwood, and she has been the best marketing investment we've ever made, because her child's having a great experience at the school, and as she's trimming ladies' hair, she is spreading the word about Mentone Grammar. There's a few hairdressers that we work pretty hard. I don't need to get a lot of haircuts, going back to the boys' hair, but I get my hair cut a lot by one hairdresser who is a great gossip in our local area, and she's a good marketing dollar spent there. We have playing fields out at Keysborough, so we have a large playing field centre out at Keysborough, and we have a school camp fortunately located down at Shoreham. So we're very well resourced as a school, and as Simon has heard me say to our board of directors over the years, our predecessors bought properties very wisely, because the school has got a beautiful base of properties, and certainly the students benefit greatly from the playing fields, but also from our beautiful camp down at Shoreham, right on the beachfront. So how do we go about educating a young person? It's all research based. So I'm going to go through 4 pieces of the puzzle that we call our explicit improvement agenda. So Mentone Grammar back in 2010 was ranked 120th in the state. For a school of our ilk, that's not good enough. And I remember hitting the table loudly at an executive meeting and saying, this has got to change. It was all part of our co-educational journey, and so as we started an improvement agenda, the first thing we went to was, what's the research saying about improving educational outcomes? The first one we went to is the research of a Melbourne University researcher called John Hattie. John Hattie has done metadata analysis of what actually improves learning and what is good teaching. Now, when I went to school, and I suspect when you went to school, and when I became a teacher in the first instance, so much of it was, yeah, I reckon that'd work. Let's give that a go. There was no research. There was no one like John Hattie doing this mega research exercise, and John has collected 16,000 surveys from which he's worked out what influences learning and teaching best, and then he's ranked them from the most influential to those that actually make no difference. So when we implement anything at Mentone Grammar, we'll reference John Hattie's charts. This will be educative for the boys too. We reference the charts that John's got to say, well, that's a great suggestion you've got, but let's check what John Hattie's saying in his research. Is it going to make a difference? Because you can implement a whole lot of things that actually aren't going to make change. And you'll see from this presentation, the things that we've implemented are very much about John Hattie's research and saying, we know if we do that, it's going to work. And we can change some of those elements, some we have no control of. So the house that a young person comes from is a major determinant of their educational outcome. I can't change that a lot. Although some parents would say I try pretty hard to change all of our houses by telling them how to parent. And that's a responsibility I have, I think, of saying, who thought that was smart? That's dumb. Don't do that. And I bang on about party culture and all those sort of things in the hope of creating a better environment for these to be better young people, but also better learners. So the first point is, John Hattie tells us what is workable and what's actually going to improve. But the thing he wants is that we not only identify that, but we put strategies in place and then teachers sit and share their thinking around that. So we are a school with a compulsory sport program for the students. We took all our staff off coaching and turned all that time into professional learning. And slowly but surely we started to see improvement in our academic performance as a result, to the point where we're now one of the top 5 co-ed schools performing in the state. But it's been a massive journey, and full credit to the team of staff who have done extraordinary work in just improving a learning outcome for a young person. The second part of the puzzle with our academic improvement agenda was to put in place what are called formative assessments rather than summative assessments. I'm going to leave that one for the moment because I am going to come back to that a little bit later in the presentation. But again, you'll note it's all research based. It's not, reckon that'd work. And that's how it was. And I know when I first started at Mentone Grammar as a teacher many years ago, that's exactly how it was. Let's give that a go. Might work, might not. It's just interesting that it's all now research based. We looked then not only at our academic performance, but we knew that if we wanted to improve our overall performance, we needed to put in place emotional intelligence training for our students to take them to a higher level as young people. And I am biased, but I'm really proud of the young people that we produce. I'm ridiculously biased, and that's understandable, but they are a generation of really good young people. And one of the reasons I say that is they have a higher level of emotional intelligence than certainly, again, when I went to school. I think, I went to Mentone Grammar as a student, so I've got a good comparative base, and we were an all-boys school. I'd say we were a bit of a grunt and groan school. Yeah, good one, you loser, what's going on there? And they probably do that as well, but they are much more emotionally in touch with themselves and their peers because of training with things like the ruler program. I think, Lockie, you were going to talk a little bit about that.
As Mr. Cater said, the ruler program is focused on students' emotional intelligence, and I've been at the school for quite a while, since 3-year-old kinder. So I've gone through this ruler program for a lot of years, and it really helps students open up to their feelings instead of hiding them away. And I think it's a really good program for younger students. And still, if you don't do it in Mentor, you still gather it on throughout the years at Mentone Grammar. So I feel like ruler program is actually really good.
So Lockie, given your journey, I'll use principal voice, you keep using that. You would have gone through periods where you checked in of a morning as to how you were feeling, correct?
Yes. When you walked into your class, there was a laminated piece of paper on the wall with different colours stating different emotions. Red usually meant angry, and yellow usually meant happy or energetic. Green was more calm, and blue was on the sad side. So there was an energy level and a happiness level. It's like kind of like a graph, but you place your little face on where you were that morning, and then by the end of the day, if you changed in any way, you'd place it where you were.
And what Lockie may not have picked up at the time is that then helps the teacher teach a class in a more effective manner, because if you've got a student in the red zone, they're not in a good space to even do learning. And it might be that something's happened at home overnight that's made them angry. And you don't want to try and teach an angry student. They won't actually learn a lot. You want students in that more calm base, and there's sort of ideal points on this quadrant graph that Lockie's described that say we want you there if we can, and by the end of the day we definitely want you in a much happier space. And so getting them in a mode where they could actually do the learning was all part of that journey. And then around all of that, sort of building a vocabulary and also learning how to cope with moving from one quadrant to another. Do you want to say anything about that one? Just moving from quadrants?
Yeah. I remember, I'll do a little one of what happened with me. I remember one night I got a bit angry at my sister, and the next day I was still angry at her, so I was in the red zone, and my teacher could see that I wasn't quite happy and I wasn't really learning. So she pulled me aside and talked to me about it, and I learnt, you know, about over different things, and I ended up by the end of the day coming more into the yellow zone and more happy and more, you know, energetic going home instead of being more angry like I was at the start of the day. So yeah.
Well done, thanks, Locke.
That's great.
And our school has a no yell policy, so teachers, if you yell at a student, you'll be in my office being reprimanded as a teacher. It's all about constructivism, of try and build programs around them being in a happy space, because one thing we do need to recognise is the world we've all created for them is a really complex world. And so trying to help them move into happy spaces is a really big part of our mantra, and the ruler program helps them with that. Thanks, Locke. And then the last part of the improvement agenda was to make sure, because they do get to a stage with the ruler program where they outgrow it. So around year 9, we actually moved to what's called the Resilience Project, and I'm not sure who was going to do that job.
So the Resilience Project is heavily pushed in years 10, 11 and 12. During once a day we have classes all as a group called mentor classes, and we focus on this this Resilience Project during this time. So the Resilience Project is essentially you learn more about the world around you. You learn, especially in this day and age, you learn how to be inclusive. You learn about LGBTQ plus ideals, and for a school of this caliber, these are things that you need to learn, you need to get along with, especially in the new age, the new era. These are really important things and values that an inclusive school like Mentone Grammar should really uphold. So we learn all about Are You OK Day, which is a day just to ask, are you okay? And this, although it's such a trivial thing, this is really, really important for students. It's really important, especially Year 12 students, Year 11, they're stressed out, they've got exams, their lives feel like sometimes they're about to end. But you've got people and teachers and the school pushing this positive agenda through this Resilience Project, and it's really, really proactive, it's productive, and personally, coming from a Sri Lankan household, all this inclusivity, it's very important to me, and it's very important to my friends and teachers around me, and I really appreciate the Resilience Project and Mentone Grammar for pushing it.
So Joel's mentioned their inclusivity, and let me talk a little bit about that, because societally we have changed a lot in that regard. All of these students, I would think, know a homosexual student. There's nothing wrong with that. We need to create inclusive environments where everyone is respected. My proudest moment last night at the valedictory was when a student who, to give you a very brief overview of this young person's life, had a massive falling out with his parents because he does wish to transgender, and his parents just could not cope with that, and they were just fighting all the time. This young person ended up in a refuge, and we became in loco parentis, turned 18, has subsequently then gone out and rented an apartment. I tell you this story not to blow my own trumpet, but to give you an idea of the quality of environment that these young people are immersed in. That young person, everyone writes a card to their parents at valedictory to say thank you. He wrote his card for me, and he actually came to me, and I will get emotional telling this because it was a really special moment. He said, "You're the finest man I've ever met." They are an amazing generation, very in touch with their emotions. And that was part of, to bring it back to our presentation, improving our agenda to say, we know you can't learn when you're angry, so let's work you out of that angry zone. We know you can't work when you're massively stressed, let's move you out of that zone and let's build young people who have the capacity to cope. And a lot of the Resilience Project is about that bounce back ability. Thanks guys for your input there. So what is a modern learner? The learners are very different, certainly to when I went to school, and I suspect very much when you all went to school. They are a very empowered generation from a very young age. They do have shorter concentration spans, and everything I say is very respectful of the generation. Don't get me wrong when I'm saying things like that, but they are a click and go generation. If you can't keep things moving, they get bored really quickly, and you'll see how we accommodate that in our teaching and learning as we progress. But they do have shorter concentration spans. So rather than bang on about this generation, they can't concentrate, accommodate that within your structure. They are incredibly digitally connected, and as I said to you, this is not all evil, all right? They are. The last thing I said to them in the car park is, just turn your phones to silent, guys, knowing they'd all be armed with a phone and it's likely to be going ping, ping, ping all the time. That's okay, because that's their generation, and I, for one, am very respectful of that. They do have way superior, no disrespect to our dear Jeff sitting there, way superior IT skills. So what their phone does is probably 10,000 times more powerful than the first computer I can remember Mentone Grammar ever getting. And it took up half of this room. So it's hard to believe, isn't it? So they are very digital. They are also not scared of digital. And I'll have a screen shortly about during COVID, we couldn't have done COVID without them being digital citizens. And they were brilliant throughout COVID. They're very stimulated. If you go into cafes, children are on iPads from a very young age, and it's this visual stimulation all the time. Even the local playgrounds are much more stimulating than the set of monkey bars and the swings we probably had, if we had those. So the playground equipment is designed to stimulate thinking and learning and playing in teams and all those sorts of things. So they are a very stimulated generation, which makes it very demanding for teachers to say, we've got to provide really interesting learning materials. They're very connected as learners. They don't always like to learn individually. They like to learn collectively. And again, we'll go through some examples of these things. They are very demanding in our school of high quality teaching. And I love that. I love that they are very demanding of high performing teachers. And we say to our Year 12s, valedictory last night, the Year 12 studies full of students studying this morning, get to your teachers, ask them lots of questions. And our teachers know that our expectation is very high, but they're demanding of that. And if we get a bad teacher, they'll soon let me know. And that's fine, because we have to accommodate their needs. If they want to be good learners, let's give them the best people possible to teach them. They are behaviourally more demanding post-COVID. Not these four, thank goodness, but we've noticed a big change in behaviour patterns since COVID. And that's just re-engaging young people at school to say there are certain unacceptable social behaviours and just mentoring them through that experience. But there's no doubt that around that middle school stage of Year 7, Year 8, Year 9, they did miss out on a lot. And we have to be respectful of that and bring them around to what are more acceptable standards. They're very keen to learn real skills. When will I ever use this is a question teachers get asked a lot. And if you think back to maths, you did algebra year in, year out. And kids will say, why am I doing this again? And you'll see how we accommodate that too as part of it. So how do we best teach them? First one is we chunk the lessons. So our lessons go for 58 minutes, don't ask how that came about. It was a negotiation between the staff and myself. They wanted 55s, I wanted 60s. We negotiated slightly on the edge of the principle, we go to 58s. So hence, we finished the day at
3:38.
3:38, well done Joel. It's a real weird thing, but I'm not a fan of everything has to be so generic that it finishes in a 5 or a 0. You just do the learning when the learning's there to be done. So we take the 58 minutes and we chunk it down into manageable blocks. accommodating the concentration span. We make sure the content is as real as possible and that it's interesting material. So in Year 9, when the research on Year 9s is massive disengagement, we take them out of their program and they actually run a little cafe at school, a little barista program that they do. They're still doing learning, but they're doing it in a totally different setting by running a cafe. Works really effectively. We minimise rote learning. Now, you're probably cringing in your seats. We don't sit and chant tables. We don't sit and chant anything, because as you'll see, my view is that's not learning. That's regurgitation of information, and I know that that's a real bugbear of generations to say, but they don't know their tables. They probably have a device that tells them all the answers. I was in a shop where I had my badge on, and the shopkeeper, in a fairly smug manner, counted the change back to me and then said, "I'll bet your kids at school couldn't do that." And I said, "I'll bet they can do a whole lot of things you can't do." And to his credit, he said, "That's a fair point. We've just got to be respectful that they are a different generation with different learning needs. I can talk into that now, and it can translate into any language on the earth." And so we're asking ourselves, why are we teaching languages programs still? Because they're not going to need some of those skills. And so we've got to make it skill appropriate. Don't get me wrong, they need basic skills. But the rote learning that we all did, and I know certainly I did, wasn't actually learning. It was an ability to regurgitate information, which then satisfied a teacher because you could pass the test. Not sure there was a lot of learning going on. But don't start me on that one, because as you can see, it's a real bugbear of mine. We structure our lessons, which links to the chunking of lessons, but structure it for the diversity of learner in each class. So it's not pitch at the middle. That was when I first started teaching, I was told, pitch at the middle, and that'll accommodate the high-end kids and the low-end kids. And if the high-end learners get to a stage where they've finished the work, just give them a bit more work. That wasn't good teaching practice. We know that now from the research. Use the technologies. Don't be afraid to use the technologies. And don't be afraid. One of the reasons I bought the boys is we're going to get to a stage of doing some technology stuff, and they're going to do it, because I don't do a lot of classroom teaching. So if it goes wrong, their problem, not mine. But we think we've got this worked out that it'll actually work. But they're not afraid of the technologies. Whereas I look at my phone, or I look at downloading stuff, and I think, oh, this could all go wrong. They're much more adventurous. So let's utilise the technologies in the classrooms. Assess in an ongoing manner. You'll see a bit more about this in a moment, so I'll hold that one for the moment. Asking yourself, is learning happening? And one of our mantras amongst our teaching team is every lesson, every day. Not every now and then. Is every lesson, every day a good lesson? And is learning happening in every lesson? And then vary the venue. I was wandering around down at school this morning, and there was a Year 8 class doing poetry, just wandering around the school looking for stimulus. We don't have to be in the four walls of a classroom all the time. And you're probably thinking, gee, I wish I could go back to school, because school is much more interesting and much more engaging than certainly when I went to it. So don't feel you've got to be locked in the classroom. And Simon's heard me say this many times. Do the learning wherever, whenever, as long as the learning takes place. So if they're in the middle of the oval, as a group of the poetry students were, and I went out and said, what learning are you doing? Oh, we're doing poetry and this is what we're working on. How fantastic. And they were really engaged with what they were doing. Much better than trying to flog the dead horse in a classroom where they're probably saying, get me out of here, I just want to kick a football. Those days, fortunately, have changed. And then make a connection with the person. So I've just told you a lovely story about these four guys, and I'll embarrass them. They'll be rapt that I know that story. But I know that story because I'm interested in what all our students are doing, and we try and employ relational teachers. Totally appropriate relationships, let me qualify, but they need to make connections. So they need to know what sports these guys are doing. They need to know what activities they're doing outside of classes. And by creating a relationship, there's a loyalty to the person that says, I actually want to learn for that teacher because they're actually genuinely interested in me. I had a funny experience when football finals were on in the local district. A lot of our students play for Beaumaris Sharks Football Club. And on one Friday, I had 4 different students come to me to say, "Sir, are you coming to my grand final tomorrow?" And I made the mistake of saying to the first 2, "Yes, absolutely, where are we, what time?" Well, by the time it was finished, I had 4 venues I had to go to on a Sunday afternoon. And I had to go back to them all to say, look, I think I can get to a quarter of yours, a half of yours. But I circumnavigated this Bayside area. But the lovely thing was, on the Monday, those students all came back and said, "Sir, thank you so much for coming down to the footy." That's the connections, and it's, I use my example, but I went to each of those games and there would have been 5, 10 of our staff watching those same finals. And that's what we try and create, because there will then be a loyalty that says, I'll actually do the right thing by you, and I'll do the right thing by the school. And you're reading about muck-up mistakes that have happened in schools. There should not be muck-up mistakes happening in schools. We've just had a beautiful celebration with our students, but I'm reading, Scotch College has got a teacher with a broken jaw because of muck-up activities. That should never happen. And in the environment where respect prevails, that should not be the case. And I'm only drawing on that one example. I could quote 20 of schools that have had bad muck-ups. We've had a really lovely celebration. We give them enough to have fun, but don't overstep the mark. They know me well enough. So how do we do assessment? Think back to when you went to school and you got a report at the end of a year or at the end of a term or at the end of a semester, and that backtracked 6 months of learning potentially. You may have done no learning in that time. But 6 months later, parents were rapt, they got a report that said, you're on an E. Well, that's useless. So these are the practices of old that actually should have been seen as dumb all the time. I'll show you in a moment how we do assessment, but it needs to be ongoing. And I'll ask the boys, I'll just give them a prompt to think about how immediate teachers get feedback from them about whether they're learning or not. But don't wait till the end of a term or the end of a semester to provide feedback. And so what we do is we have learner profiles for all our students. So year 5 through to year 12, every student has a learner profile. Any data that goes into our, and we tailor-made this software for ourselves, any data that goes in is uploaded at 2 a.m. each night, and a parent can go in the next day and see the learner profile as up to date as that. A parent said to me recently, why was it that I got this report and it had some bad marks on? I said, why was it that you didn't see that on the student learning system and ring us? Because we've got to share the responsibility. And you'll see here, this is student X in our school and their data. I'm not as interested in this screen as I am the next screen, just to give a context. So this details all the students' marks for this year. Down the left there are little X's. That's how they performed the year prior. This band here of grey indicates where our expected level of performance for that student, based on previous data, they should be getting at least that band of performance. I'll also qualify, it's none of their data. So when we look at this, we can see trend lines for each subject. It's all colour-coded. So we can see trend lines. So this purple line of maths, no it's not, it's, what's that, design tech. It's not going so well. It's got a few little bumps in it. So we'd be looking at that and thinking, well, hang on, why is that performance going as it is? This one, yellow, on the improve, that's Year 9 Humanities. That's a good outcome. So a teacher who's mentoring that student would be drawing on the positives and the negatives to talk about improvement, not to talk about why are you performing badly, to talk about how do we improve. This student, when you look at it, has a lot of assessments. So each dot is one individual assessment. A lot of assessments above their expected performance level. That's very praiseworthy. And so it's we train our parents how to do this too, and teachers, you know, pour the praise on for that. But when you look at certain trends, so there's some down here as well, this colour green is really prominent, and that's the maths assessments. So in a live environment, I can actually click on each of those buttons and it tells me what the subject was or what the test was about and the outcome. So with that student, I'd be saying, hang on, we've got a problem here with maths. Their trend line is below the expected performance. Their actual data is below the performance level. Now, I'm an accountant by training. I love all this. Not all of our teachers do, because they're not all data specialists. But the screen that I ask people to focus on is this one. Because what we focus on to improve a student's performance isn't just get good grades in your class, get your learning behaviours consistently across this screen. And so I deliberately picked a student who had a bit more colour on it than just green. Lots of our students are consistently in all 5 of these core learning behaviours. Where did the learning behaviours come from? Research. Because research tells us if a student is engaged in their learning, they will perform better. If they're prepared and organised for each lesson, will perform better. Complete the set tasks, goes without saying, they will perform better. Can they learn both independently and collaboratively? They will perform better. And so I'm mentoring a student in Year 9 at the moment, and his screen had red everywhere. Not a good screen, right? None of the boys would be happy to have a red screen, because it's rarely doing the right thing. And that's why he sort of rose up to that principal level of intervention. He's now, over the last 6 months, worked, and we didn't talk about a single mark, but he's worked at getting green on the screen. That's the phrase I use. And what's happened? His grades in each subject have gone up. Because if we can get this side of it right, and that's a great coaching tool for a young person, we actually achieve some really spectacular outcomes. So focus on the process, not the result. So we say to our parents, don't talk about A+, talk about green on the screen. And if you can achieve that, you really do achieve some pretty spectacular outcomes. Formative assessment rather than summative assessment. So let's go along. What's a formative assessment? Bang, I know learning's happening in the class. Anyone? I've got some samples here.
Yeah.
Just project your voice.
A formative assessment is a pre-test at the start of a topic. Let's say I'm doing chemistry right now in science. We'd have a science test. Although it's not graded, it would basically say, it would tell the teacher what parts of chemistry I know from previous years, how much I didn't listen in classes, and the teacher would take this information, take the grade I got, and and the class had got, and the whole year had got, and they would put it into a type of learning method so that they could cater to each individual students. And instead of, as Mr. Cater said, instead of just pitch in the middle, they now know where the average student is, where I am, where Lockie is for chemistry. And it's not just chemistry, we do this for practically every subject, and it really shows an improvement, because then we're not just learning the same stuff as years prior, we're learning new stuff, and we're getting better at the stuff that we haven't retained over the year.
So the idea of pre-test is, don't reteach if you don't need to reteach it. Because algebra is the classic in maths. If you look at maths curriculum over the years, you do algebra every year of your learning. If you've mastered algebra at year 7, just don't keep banging on about it, take it to a different level. And so the idea of pre-testing is turn the resources, turn the learning into what do we need to learn rather than what do we already know. And so that's where you can take learning to a higher level. Then at the end of the topic, do a post-test, check that the learning has actually taken place, and if not, revisit some of the topics. And therefore, we're not bound to just screaming through work. It's do the work as we need to, but make sure that the learning is actually achieved. So pre and post tests is one way we do that. I'm banging on about things that really do my head in over the years. If I said to you a question and said, hands up, who'd like to answer the question, I'm being an idiot. Because who puts their hand up? Everyone who knows the answer. Who doesn't get asked? The kid who hasn't got his hand up. So we don't do, in most classes, so you still see this a little bit, but we're trying to move away from, don't put your hands up, use random selectors. How do random selectors work? Anyone? Ollie? Oh, sorry. Ollie or Johnny?
Basically, like, the teacher has like a little thing on their device, and it basically selects a kid at random to pick the answer. So if someone's got their hand up, you probably won't get picked, because they rely on a child who probably won't have the answer, so then they can teach them.
Okay, so the idea is put everyone on notice. You could all be asked this question. I was in a class myself the other day, observing an accounting teacher. I love visiting the accounting class. And I thought I knew the answer, but the teacher said, Mr. Cater, don't lose sight. I could ask you. I was as nervous. So I thought, gee, what if I get it wrong? But then the teacher, rather than even announce the result, did a survey, and then we worked out why one answer was the right answer. Well, phew, I got it right. I'll move quickly through some of these. So random selectors. Some classes have icy pole sticks with all the students' names on. Random selector, so-and-so, do you know the answer to this question? Not to embarrass kids, but to make sure everyone's on notice that we need to be trying. Exit cards, end of a lesson, what have you learnt today? Just tell us one thing. Some teachers stand at the door, tell me one thing you've learnt today. So you can see it's changed enormously. Quizzes, we're going to have a crack at it in a moment. English example. Best learning I've seen in recent times was an English class, Year 10 English class, 4 students, 4 essays without names on them, put in the middle of the table, 4 slips with the feedback related to those essays. They weren't the essays of the 4 students. Students had to each read the essay and each read the slips and work out which feedback related to which essay. I don't know that I've ever seen learning happening in front of my eyes as much as I saw that day. It was extraordinary. Self-assessments, again the research says if they can be self-aware of what they know and what they don't know, again we'll teach to a higher level. Reading circles, lit circles we call them, so students sitting in groups of 4, collaborative learning, don't go beyond 4 because 4, the research says beyond 4 someone can hide, but we all have read chapter 1 and we're all sharing notes about who the characters are, what's the storyline, what are we learning about set and structure from this. Very engaged learning as we go. Something skip there. Technology, friend or foe, you know where I'm coming from. During COVID, we could not have done it without technology being at a very high level. What we did was be on the screen every lesson, just as if you've got Period 1 Maths, you're in Period 1 Maths. Very demanding on our teachers, but it meant that learning kept happening, and as you can see from the sophisticated data we collect, our learning kept going ahead. We did not drop back, and that's a full credit to the staff because it was a really massive exercise, and full credit to the students who engaged really well. Small number of students who did disengage, but why I say friend or foe, we cannot do teaching and learning now without good technologies. Post-COVID, keep it rolling. We've lost already a number of elements of the COVID learning. We need to keep inventing some of that, and we were actually just about to go to, regardless of COVID, 1 day a week for our 11s and 12s off-site doing their learning. Because of the COVID impact, they need re-socialisation, so we've got that one on hold. But schools will go to that over time, where students are doing learning from home. Can they communicate as a generation? Yes, they can. when I present to, I get to present to Rotaries and all sorts of things, the biggest thing I hear from older people, respectfully, is, oh, this generation, they just can't communicate. Yes, they can. And the question I always ask someone who says that to me is, when did you last speak to a young person? And in most cases, the answer comes, now that's a really good point, because I don't talk to young people that much. They're great young people. You'll get a feel for that when we sit down to lunch. And as you can sense, I'm a big fan of this generation. Are they good people? Here's four who are quite outstanding, but I could take you down to the school and introduce you to a lot of very caring young people. We had the death of a student last year in a very tragic accident. No, it wasn't an accident, it was an incident, where a drugged up driver crossed the road and took this student out. Terribly tragic. Are they good people? You should have been on site with us when we got through that, because they were in lockdown, we got them on site, the students who were impacted, they were just outstanding. And where I come from with that was, I had students sending me messages, are you okay, sir? That's a good generation. Is education in a really good place? You'll hear things about PISA rankings for Australian education. It is the biggest problem Australian education has got is the differential between what the government schools, and I don't say this disrespectful, it's data driven, where the government schools are at in some cases and where the private schools are at. And we need to address that over time. So when we won an award for BCE improvement, James Molino, as the Education Minister, said, Mel, your school's actually the most improved in the state. What can I do to improve our government schools? I said, James, you're not going to be able to do what you need to do, and that is you need to sack half the bureaucrats and put all that money into schools as teachers and wellbeing support. And he turned to me and said, but we both know I can't do that. They'll never improve as a result. It's a great shame. There shouldn't be that differential. Ponderance for you. Did you learn, or did you simply regurgitate information? And I know if I reflect on my experience, we regurgitated information. I'm not sure we did real learning. And if any of you are into social media, we use hashtag real learning as one of our many social media posts. Now, how are we going for time?
It's up.
It's up. No time for the technology bit? Yeah, we have a crack? Okay, so who's going to run the Kahoot? It's a bit of fun. It's a bit of fun, the Kahoot. So phones out.
You want me to kick it off here, Mel?
Top there, yep. So Joel, you work with Jeff there, and then guys, you spread around the room. So what we've got to do, we've all got to log in. I've written 4 very special questions for you. So this is an example of how we do checking learning is happening in the classroom. So Joel's going to...
We're going to log into that.
So it'll come up and tell us the screen as we go. Yeah.
Do you know how to switch it so that that's showing the same screen as this?
So Joel's going to try and get us logged in.
That's just
We'll
live.
see how we go. Otherwise, I can demonstrate on the screen.
And so one of these buttons will convert like what this is showing to that screen. Maybe there, true.
Doesn't work, Joel, if you just click on that.
Oh no, I got it. Gonna duplicate the screen. There we go.
Okay, so when you all go in, you'll become guests. Don't try and log in. So, Joel, what do we all need to be logging into?
Alright, search up Kahoot.
IT, isn't it?
The word Kahoot will just work on Google Chrome or Safari.
Okay.
If you wanna
Work the room lock.
I'll come up here and help.
Yep. KAH00000.
If you want to participate in this, which is highly recommended, it's a bit of fun. Search up the word Kahoot, KAHOOT. If you need any help, raise your hand and one of us will be around to help out. And then once you've got in, it will ask you to put the game pin in. Oh no. So once a couple of us are already in.
Excellent. So we've got 3 participants so far. So you can see the names coming up here as you log in. Well done. Positive affirmation, Joel.
Yeah, good job, guys. So,
That's
again,
good. And even if we just end up with a small sample, that's okay.
Game pin.
Okay, Johnny, down the front here.
John.
Game pin.
Game pin, yep. Game pin is 791.
You're in.
Sorry.
I'm not here.
There's the number.
Different. I reckon my name's on here.
Beautiful. That's good. We've got a sound on that.
Sorry. Just tap in that link and then yeah, it's and then type in 7919330.
Got it? Just get to that stage and then we're right.
You put in those numbers.
Is anyone,
Oh, I
does everyone who wants to play in it?
791.
Does anyone still need some help?
Okay, so what we might do is use that as a sample, because I know
7919330.
Simon's conscious of time. So we'll use that as our sample. Now what happens, Joel?
I'll start the game.
Nickname?
Okay, so we're gonna, questions are going to come up on the screen. They won't come up on your phone. So you will simply choose which colour is the right answer. And it's based on time and
There's your name on
correctness.
the screen.
What you're starting to hopefully get a feel for. This is gold, this stuff. This really engages the students to a very high level.
Do you want to go up and just like press yellow for the answers? Alright, I'll start the game now.
Okay, so we're about to start. Yep. Here we are at the Probus meeting. In 3, be ready, because the first question's going to come up. So Malcater is principal of 4 options: Mentone Grammar, Mentone Grammar, Mentone Youth Detention Centre, Mentone Facility for Dysfunctional Youth.
So press holidays.
So you just hit the colour.
Read down here.
So boys, is the green one right?
Grammar.
Hang on, no, we don't. In some cases. Okay, so you see the summary of results. So now we'll come up with.
So we'll see who's
So Joel's
the
leading us
quickest.
through. Okay, so here's our leaderboard. Okay. So. Okay, so now we'll go on to the next question. Be ready. Okay, Mentone Grammar has sites in Mentone, Noosa, Fiji, Mentone, Port Douglas, Keysborough, Mentone, Keysborough and Shoreham, Mentone, Delhi and Baghdad. Okay, time's nearly up. Time's up. Here we go. Yes.
Yes, yellow. Mentone,
And
Keysborough, and Shore.
whoever went for A with the red, that's my wish. Okay, here's our leaderboard again.
Howard.
Steve-O's the highest
Howard's
score.
on fire here at the moment. Next question.
The quicker you indicate.
Okay, ready? These are about members of the club now. Simon Appel is Commandant, Commander, Commissioner, President.
Say commandant.
Who said that?
I've worked with him before.
He's taking over from Putin. Coming up with pure geniuses. That's Simon on me.
Okay, there we go. He's the president. Everyone got it right, Simon, which is good. Okay. Howard's still firing along there beautifully, but John is still in touch. Jeff Couples is a semi-professional golfer, IT expert, Prime Ministerial advisor, none of the above.
Question 4. It doesn't give me a thing.
Okay, 5 seconds.
Took me a while to answer that.
IT expert.
That's what he told me.
And our leaderboard is saying, here's our winners coming up. So, third was Sophie. Second was Gary. First was, spotlight's on, Aaron. it just all goes nuts at that point. But using that in a classroom is incredibly engaging with a group of students. But what you also know is what level of learning is going on. So I just use that as one example of technology in a classroom. And with that, I'll say thank you, Simon. Thank you for your attention.
Not real bad, was it? 4 fours are 16, 6 fours are 24. I don't know whether I've ever used that effectively in my life, but I know it very well. That was the sort of learning we did. Mel, that's a wonderful overview, as expected. I haven't heard most of that before, actually, but it's been a week or two since I've been at the board. But thank you so much for that. I'll call on John Hewison, I think is our member, to give a vote of thanks on behalf of
Simon, well, what an inspirational presentation. Certainly a lot different when I was at school, but it's very enlightening and very impressive, and it's always great to hear somebody passionate about what they do. So that was a takeout for me, Mel, and you will find
Common heroes.
But we actually have met before, not that I'd expect you to remember, but my 2 grandsons are students at Mentone. Sorry, gents.
Can I say, as men, that's one of the biggest mistakes we make. When we cry, we say sorry every time. Don't ever be afraid of your emotions. They will all see me cry before they graduate. They probably have already. And it's not something we should ever be ashamed of.
So, yes, my 2 grandsons are students. Their names are Jack and Harry Bowers.
Now I know why you're emotional. Yeah.
So I'd just like to share our experience that Jack and Harry lost their father about 7 years ago when they were 4 and 6. And the way that Mel and his team of people put their arms around Jack and Harry and sorry, don't say so. And my daughter was astounding and continues to this day, and it just illustrates exactly what Mel's been talking about, just the culture and the connection, and I'm a great fan of culture, and the one thing about culture is that you've got to have buy-in. And have these 4 young gentlemen indicating that they have buy-in in the culture is a very powerful message. So, Mel, thank you. A small token of our appreciation. Gentlemen, I'm sorry you're underage.
And I promise not to drink it before we get back. Can I add to that lovely story, and thank you for putting that in context. I vividly remember that funeral because it was one of the more sad occasions. But the great privilege of this job is that people invite you into their life. And dear little Jack at his dad's funeral, his biggest concern from our chaplain advising me was, is Mr. Cater going to be there? And so we reassured Jack that I was going to be at the funeral. I do have a lovely relationship with both boys. As the casket was placed into the hearse, Jack turned around in front of everyone, tears flowing, and that poignant silence that happens. And this dear little man yelled out, "Mr. Cater, can I go back to class now?" I said, "We might just stay here a little bit longer, Jack." Beautiful kids, thank you. That's special.